So you guys have been asking for this one for quite a while now, so what we'll be doing in today's video is we'll be going through the championship, and each championship rivalry, I'll be ranking them from worst to best in my opinion. So at the start of the season, fans from every championship club voted on who they consider to be their biggest rivals, and as you can see on screen now, that is who they came up with. So I'll be ranking who each club considers to be their biggest rivalry into the following categories. So a rivalry is either are they rivals, meh, underrated, loud, or hatred. Let me know down below, where would you place your club's rivalry? And just before we do hop into anything, I want to give a shout out to our sponsors over at OneFootball. As always, you can find their link in the top line or the description down below. It is a really handy app to keep up to date with all the latest ongoings around the footballing world. If you are a fan of the championship or any other league, you can go ahead and get live updates to your phone on the latest ongoings around there. Get live updates to your phone when matches are going on. We've got quite a few tasty games coming up over the weekend, which I'm excited to get your guys' view on. And like I say, heading into the tail end of the season, that's when things really do start to heat up. So like I say, OneFootball link down below. But without any further ado, let's hop into these rankings. So we'll start things out with the East Midlands derby, which takes place between Derby County and Nottingham Forest. Now for me personally, I always quite enjoy watching this one. It has been Nottingham Forest who have got the better of this rivalry over this season so far, with them beating Derby 3-0 in the Cup and 1-0 in the league. Lewis Graben scoring the only goal of that game. There's been over 100 meetings between the two clubs, where Nottingham Forest currently hold the most wins in this game with 42. In 2007, the Brian Clough Trophy was introduced in this fixture, given to whoever won the tie between the two sides. In the past, there has been football hooliganism linked to this tie as well, but there also has been some great football matches. I mean, I remember a few years ago, I think it was Derby 5, Nottingham Forest 0, seems to spring to mind. There's been quite a few big scorelines, and it always seems to be a good spectacle. So for me personally, I'm going to put that one in the loud category. For me personally, it's always one that I enjoy watching. The Potteries derby up next between Stoke City and Port Vale. Now this one is a bitter rivalry. These two clubs do not like each other. In competitive games, they've not played all too many matches between each other, because there has been quite a contrast in levels between the two clubs, especially in recent years. They did meet in 2018 in the Checkatrade Trophy, Port Vale going up against Stoke City's under-18s. Port Vale walked away with a 4-0 victory in that game. I think there were 11 arrests for that game. Before that game, the two sides hadn't met each other since 2002, and for that reason, I think this is a bit of an underrated rivalry, really. I don't think that people realise just how fierce this one is, because, like I say, these two do not like each other at all. Wigan versus Bolton, a little bit meh for me. I think I'm going to throw it into that category, really. On the survey where clubs voted for who they thought was their biggest rivals, Wigan did vote for Bolton as their biggest, but Bolton only voted Wigan as their third biggest rivals, with them considering, I think, Man United and Blackburn as their two biggest sides they face. So for this one, it's a game I always look out for. Last time they met was a cracker. Wigan beat Bolton by 5-2, but in terms of a rivalry, a little bit meh. And then we got Reading against Swindon. Now this may be my ignorance, but up until about a week ago, I didn't really know this was a rivalry, but Reading fans were singing this at Sheffield Wednesday the other day. Now I've looked back on it, and back in the day there seemed to be some tasty clashes between these two sides, but they've not actually played each other since 2002. Swindon also consider Oxford United to be their biggest rivals, and so these days, with the two clubs being so far apart, I'm not sure how much they really care about each other. Maybe it'd be different if they met again, but for the time being, I'm going to put them into that are they rivals category. Next up, we have the Second City derby, and that's going to go straight up there into the top tier. For me, one of the best rivalries in English football is between Aston Villa and Birmingham. I mean, last time these two played each other, Birmingham fan ran the pitch and punched Jack Grealish. If that doesn't get into the top category, into hatred, then I don't know what will, really. But it's always a cracking atmosphere between these two, whether that be at Villa Park or St Andrews. Obviously, like I said, the last time these two met last season, when Jack Grealish went on to score the winner. I also think the game's got a lot of interest for people who don't support either Villa or Birmingham. I think there's just a lot of interest from the country in general in this game. The only thing for me that sort of takes away from it is how one-sided the derby has been in recent years. You know, I think Birmingham have only won one of their last 16 games against Aston Villa. So in recent years especially, it has been Villa who have been dominating the tie. But apart from that, it is a top tier rivalry. Losing against Watford as a rivalry, I wasn't too sure where to place this one before I made the video, but looking into the history of this one, I'm going to throw it straight into underrated. They've not played each other much in recent years. The last time they met was all the way back in 2006, but looking at the past meetings between these two sides, it can be an absolute bloodbath. Red cards, fans fighting, arrests being made at the match. Looking into it, it seems that this rivalry seems to really heat up around about the 60s, and from then on, things continue to escalate whenever these two sides did meet each other. For me personally, it goes into underrated underrated. Fulham versus Chelsea, again, bit of a mess sort of rivalry for me. I'd be interested to know from Fulham fans, would you still consider Chelsea to be your biggest rivals? But in terms of Chelsea, I think they're more distracted by Spurs these days. And we talk about one-sided rivalries. Fulham have only beaten Chelsea once since 1980. So for this one, I'm not sure it's got the same bite to some of the others above it. Hull versus Leeds, I'm not too sure about this one. I think I'm going to throw this one into the are they rivals category, just for the fact that on the survey, Hull did say that Leeds were their biggest rivals, but Hull weren't even considered in Leeds' top 5 for their biggest. I think there's over 60 miles between the two clubs. I don't think anyone really likes Leeds, but is there a rivalry, especially between these two? I don't know myself. The East Lancashire derby between Blackburn and Burnley is definitely a fierce one, which is up there for me personally. You know, living in Lancashire, I know about this one quite a bit. Always a good atmosphere at Turf Moor or Ewood Park when these two sides meet, and there is a lot of history in this one. Obviously, both clubs being founding members of the Football League, they do not like each other, and that's evident when it does come around to derby day. For me personally, I'm going to put it into the loud category. I think there is quite a bit of spite between these two. The Steel City derby is right up there for me in terms of the best rivalries in English football. The battle for Sheffield. What I do like about this one is it's normally so evenly matched. Like, there's not normally all too much in it between the two sides, where in this sort of second city derby you get Aston Villa dominating it a lot of the time. This one, you can hardly separate the two sides throughout history. Sheffield United currently lead the tie for all-time wins with 49, but Sheffield Wednesday are just one behind that, winning 48 of the ties. The last 3 games between them have all ended as goalless draws, but before that was an absolute cracker when Sheffield United went to Hillsborough, beat them by 4-2. Obviously now we're seeing Sheffield United flying high in the Premier League and possibly going for Europe this season, which is mental, and there's a bit of a gap that's emerged between the two clubs lately, but overall, absolutely fantastic rivalry, goes into that top tier for me. The Black Country derby is another good one for me between West Brom and Wolves. These two haven't met all too much in recent years, but whenever they have, it always seems to be a bit of a cracker of a match. 12 goals in their last 3 meetings. Only 10 or so miles separates these two clubs, and they do have a bitter rivalry. The last time they did meet, it was West Brom who beat Wolves at Molineux by 5-1. There's a bit of a gap between the two sides now, but for me personally, it goes into that loud category. Good derby. Next up, we then got the West Lancashire derby between Preston North End and Blackpool. Now, for me personally, obviously as a Preston fan, I'm going to say this is an absolutely massive rivalry, because it is to me personally. Preston and Blackpool do not like each other. This one goes way back and has a whole bunch of history behind it. The first meeting between the two clubs being in 1901. This one being the Stanley Matthews against Tom Finney derby. Last time the two sides met was all the way back in 2013, where it was North End who came out on top in the League Cup. Tom Clark scoring a late goal in that game. It's always a top atmosphere at the game, but I actually feel it's a really underrated one because not too many people know about it, and I feel like the reason for that is that we've hardly played each other. Like, since 2000, Preston and Blackpool have only played each other 8 times. That's because for most of the part we've been in different leagues to each other. For me personally, it's a top rivalry, but I would say it is vastly underrated by a lot of people, so I'll throw it into that category. Charles against Millwall was an interesting one, and I'd be open to having my mind swayed on this one, to be honest, because obviously in terms of proximity between the two clubs, there's nothing really in it. Charlton certainly see Millwall as their biggest rivals, but is that then reciprocated by Millwall? I'm not so sure. The Bristol derby between Bristol City and Bristol Rovers gets thrown into that underrated category, quite similar to Preston against Blackpool. Really, these two clubs just haven't played each other that much lately. Since the year 2000, they've only had 7 meetings, the last of which being in 2013 in the Johnson Spate Trophy, where it was Bristol City who walked away with a 2-1 home victory. The two sets of fans don't get along. There was a pitch invasion after that game, and for me personally, it goes into that underrated category. I don't think enough people know about that. Millwall against West Ham, I mean, this one goes way back and is without doubt one of the most bitter rivalries in English football. I think it is one of, if not the most police games whenever this one comes around. There's a lot of history behind this one which you can read into if you'd like, to do with football hooliganism and that sort of thing. Thinking back to 2009 when we had the Upton Park riot between these two sides when they met in the League Cup, for me personally, it goes into top tier. There just is a hatred there. The South Wales derby is always a hotly contested one. So far this season in the head-to-head games, it has been Swansea who have got the better of it. They beat Cardiff 1-0 at home and then got that draw away, although it is Cardiff who currently sit above Swansea in the league. Not too much in it between those two at the moment. But it is a fascinating rivalry which does have quite a lot of history behind it. The atmospheres always look fantastic, and going back in history, there has been, incidents of violence between both sets of fans. It is a fierce rivalry, and for me personally, I'm going to put it into that loud category. Leeds versus Man United is an interesting one, obviously one that dates back to when they were both knocking about in the Premier League, but these days, it's a tough one to categorise really. In the survey done, Leeds did vote Manchester United as their biggest rivals, and I feel like although, like a lot of other big clubs, Man United has become like a bit plastic with the fan base and things like that. Like, proper Man United fans do still hold that hatred for Leeds United, and I still feel like there is a bit of a rivalry there. I mean, they played each other a few weeks ago in the FA Youth Cup. I think Leeds sold out their allocation at Old Trafford in like less than an hour or something, of about 1,500 away fans. There has been iconic moments between them as well, thinking back to the FA Cup in 2010 with that goal from Jermaine Beckford winning it at Old Trafford. I'm going to throw it into the loud category. I feel like if they were to meet each other again in the league, like if Leeds were to be promoted, it would be a cracking atmosphere. Speaking of Leeds United, Huddersfield consider Leeds to be their biggest rivals. For that one, it's a difficult one to judge these sorts of derbies where it's not always like reciprocated by the other team, because then how do you actually then judge the derby? There's been some cracking matches between them, but in terms of a rivalry itself, it's a little bit meh to me. It's also the same sort of occurrence for a lot of these London derbies that we got going on. I mean, QPR consider their biggest rivals to be Chelsea, according to that survey, and then Brentford consider their biggest rivals to be Fulham. So we've got sort of like a weird triangle going on where every other team in London sees each other as their biggest rivals, but that's not like reciprocated, if that makes sense. So it's a weird one to judge, really. I mean, I'd be interested to know from fans of these London clubs, who would you yourself consider to be your biggest rival? For the time being, for these ones, I'm probably going to throw them into that mesh sort of category. Barnsley against Sheffield Wednesday is another awkward one, really, as obviously Wednesday's biggest rivals are Sheffield United, so where did then Barnsley fit into that equation? I have actually quite enjoyed some of the meetings between these two over the years. Obviously, that whole Sam Winnell situation kicked things off a few years ago when he scored, but I don't quite feel like there's the same hostility in this game as there are in some others above it, so it's another one for that sort of mess sort of category for me. Then finishing it off with Middlesbrough up against Sunderland, who they consider to be their biggest rivals. Now, once again, the thing that takes away from this rivalry is the fact that I think a lot of people in this region consider the biggest rivalry to be between Sunderland and Newcastle. So this one sort of gets put on the back burner a little bit. I don't think there is like as much hatred in this tie for that reason, and then that ends up being a bit of a sort of mess sort of tie. But guys, there you have it. There is every championship club and their biggest rivals and where I would rank their rivalry. So let me know down below if you think I have slipped up in this one and made any mistake. Where would you put your club into this ranking, and what has been your favourite derby day moment? Well, apart from that, guys, that will now wrap it up for today's video. So if you did go on to enjoy, make sure you do leave a like. It is always massively appreciated. Make sure you do subscribe for a bit of regular championship content. But apart from that, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.